Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
It's great to be here. We have a really packed set of sources today. They're painting a picture of a world that feels like it's in constant flux. We're going from, these high-stakes geopolitical poker games right down to the literal ground crumbling beneath our feet in our own cities.
It really does feel like we're living through some kind of timeline glitch this week. I mean, we're looking at 11 distinct stories, but the thread connecting them, for me at least, seems to be this tension, a tension between the systems we're supposed to rely on and the reality is they're just failing to address.
That's a great way to put it.
And nowhere is that more obvious and, frankly, just more bizarre than in our very first topic. We have to start with this new phrase, the Donroe Doctrine.
That phrase alone, the Donroe Doctrine, tells you everything. It tells you we're in a completely new era. It's obviously a play on the old Monroe Doctrine, but twisted for the very specific political reality of January 2026.
Right, and let's just set the scene for anyone who hasn't been glued to the foreign policy feeds. We have this spectacle where U.S. President Donald Trump has essentially abducted the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro. That's the big, loud headline event.
Unprecedented stuff.
But then, almost silently, on January 15th, you have CIA Director John Ratcliffe sitting in a room in Caracas. And who is he negotiating with? Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's former VP, who is now the interim president. It just doesn't compute.
It looks like a massive contradiction, doesn't it? On one hand, you abduct the head of state. On the other, you're treating his deputy like a legitimate negotiating partner. But this right here is the very essence of the Donroe Doctrine.
Okay, so break that down. How does this differ from, say, what we saw in the early 2000s?
It's a sharp distinction from the neocon interventions. Think Iraq, Afghanistan.
George W. Bush nation-building era, spreading democracy, that kind of thing.
Exactly. That was about ideology. It was driven by this idea of tearing down an entire structure and then, trying to build a democracy in your own image, whether it fit or not. The Donroe Doctrine is purely transactional.
No ideology at all.
Not in the same way. The article describes it perfectly as regime management rather than regime change. Trump doesn't want the headache, the cost, the mess of actually governing Venezuela. He just wants the resources. He wants the oil.
So he's effectively telling Delcy Rodriguez, look, you can keep the palace, you can have the title, just make sure the oil flows where we want it to.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And the question that everyone is asking is, why is she agreeing to this? Why capitulate to the administration that literally just kidnapped her boss? It seems like a total surrender.
It does. It looks incredibly weak.
Well, it's a survival strategy.
Yeah.
And it's a strategy dictated by a massive geopolitical failure. And this is the real core insight from the editorial. The multipolar safety net completely broke.
The multipolar safety net. You mean the idea that countries like China and Russia would step in?
Precisely. For years, the working assumption in the global south was that if the U.S. squeezes you, you just pivot. You turn to China, you turn to Russia, you get loans from Beijing, you get security guarantees and weapons from Moscow. That was the playbook.
But when push finally came to shove here in 2026...
They didn't show up. They were nowhere to be seen. China and Russia did not step in to stop the U.S. from reasserting total dominance in its own backyard. And for any other nation that's been relying on that counterbalance, that is a terrifying realization.
It basically proves that despite all the talk of a new multipolar world, old-school geographic hegemony still rules the day. If you're close to a superpower, you play by their rules.
That's the lesson. So Venezuela is totally isolated. And the terms of this management are incredibly specific when it comes to the oil, aren't they? It's not just sell us the oil.
No, it's much more insidious than that.
It's a masterclass in financial control, really. The article explains that the sanctions are technically being reversed, which sounds good. But the oil revenue doesn't go to Caracas. It flows into specially created accounts in Qatar.
And here's the kicker.
This is the kicker. The Venezuelan state can only access those funds, their own money, with explicit U.S. approval for every single transaction.
It's an allowance, a state-level allowance controlled by Washington.
It's a completely closed loop. And it gets worse. Even when they get approval to spend the money, they are mandated to use it to buy American imports. So the U.S. controls the resource, they control the revenue, and they control the spending. It is total imperial control without the bad PR of putting boots on the ground.
A stark lesson in what happens when you lack strategic depth. Which, funnily enough, if we just look across the ocean, we see a country that is aggressively building that exact kind of depth. The second editorial on India and the UAE suggests a very, very different power dynamic.
It's almost the inverse scenario. You're right. While Venezuela is being managed, India and the UAE are constructing what the article calls a partnership of architects of a transnational strategic partnership.
I have to admit, I usually gloss over terms like comprehensive strategic partnership. They always sound like diplomatic fluff. But the frequency of contact here, that's what's unusual. The UAE president, MBZ, was in India on January 19th.
And the article points out that's the 11th leadership-level visit in as many years. That's almost one a year.
That's not just diplomatic courtesy, that's a sign of real urgency. They're clearly moving past the getting-to-know-you phase and into the heavy lifting of deep economic integration.
Absolutely. The handshakes are done. Now it's about pouring concrete.
So what does that look like on the ground? Because the headlines all mention one place, Dollara.
Galra is the big test case. It's a special investment region down in Gujarat. And the UAE specifically, we're talking about the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, one of the world's biggest sovereign wealth funds, is pouring staggering amounts of money into it.
And we're not just talking about building a few factories.
No. We're talking about foundational infrastructure, a brand new international airport, smart city infrastructure, so 5G grids, data centers, and, crucially, semiconductors.
Semiconductors. That seems to be the new currency of global power, the new oil, in a way.
It absolutely is. And notice the strategic shift here. This partnership isn't just about the UAE selling India oil anymore. That's the old model. Now they're collaborating on things like small modular nuclear reactors.
Which is interesting because the UAE has serious expertise there now.
They do. They already generate a quarter of their power from nuclear. So they have real-world operational experience to share.
Yeah.
And to put a number on all of this, they've set a joint trade target of $200 billion by 2032.
That's a massive, massive number.
It's huge. But beyond the money, you have to look at the geopolitics. The analysis in the piece suggests that amidst all the chaos in West Asia, with Israel, Palestine, Iran, the UAE is positioning itself and being seen by India as a stable pillar.
A safe harbor in a storm.
Exactly. It's a way for India to secure its energy needs and its economic interests in the region without getting dragged directly into all the conflicts. It provides a kind of strategic insulation.
And building that kind of resilience, it takes decades. It requires infrastructure, sure, but it also needs human capital. And that brings us perfectly to the opinion section, because if you want to build a semiconductor industry in 20 years, you need to fix your schools today.
And the diagnosis in this article, scaling success, is, well, it's pretty worrying. It puts India's school system side by side with China's. And the difference boils down to one single word: scale.
But wait, we have a lot of schools, right? I mean, you see them everywhere in every village.
We do. And that's the problem. India has 5.6 lakh schools with fewer than 50 students each. Just stop and think about the logistics of that for a second. You have a total student body of maybe 40 or 50 kids, but they range in age from, say, 6 to 11.
So you've got one teacher in one room trying to teach 5 different grade levels at the same time.
Exactly. It's called multi-grade teaching, and the article is blunt. It's a disaster for quality education. You can't have a specialized science teacher for class 5. You can't have a computer lab or a library. You can't have any kind of vocational training. You just have a room and one incredibly harried teacher.
And the comparison with China is stark.
It is. China has 1/3 the number of schools that India does, but they are massive. The average school size is 2,800 students.
Wow, that sounds more like a factory, though. Doesn't it lose the personal touch?
You could see it that way, but the article frames it as an educational ecosystem. When you have 2,800 kids in one place, you can afford proper chemistry labs, big sports complexes, and most importantly, subject experts for every single topic. The article argues that India needs to move toward this model of composite schools.
Meaning consolidate those tiny little village schools.
Yes. Consolidate them into larger K-12 or K-8 campuses, maybe one at every Gram Panchayat level. The goal they mentioned for 2035 is one main K-8 school per Panchayat with about 300 students. That sounds sensible on paper. You get better resources, better teachers.
But here's the snag I see immediately. Geography. If you close the local village school and move it 5 or 10 kilometers away, who's the first to stop going?
It's always the girls. Or the children from the poorest families who can't afford transport or whose parents can't spare the time. The article is clear. If you don't solve the transport logistics, school buses, safe walking routes, then consolidation just becomes another word for exclusion.
And that very risk of exclusion ties directly into the next piece we have, which is about the invisible barriers holding women back. We talk about the distance to a school, but what about the simple lack of time? The article on gender time poverty really struck a chord with me.
It's a concept we just don't discuss enough. We talk about financial poverty all the time, but time poverty is just as crippling, if not more so. The core statistic in this piece is that women contribute only 18% to India's GDP.
And the immediate, frankly, lazy assumption many people make is, oh, well, that's because they aren't working.
Which is completely and utterly false. The 2025 time use data, which the article cites, shows women are working incredibly hard. They spend, on average, 366 minutes a day on unpaid care work. And that number has actually gone up since the last survey in 2019.
So that's cooking, cleaning, fetching water, childcare, taking care of the elderly, all the work that keeps society functioning but never gets counted.
Exactly. And this is the really critical part. They are also doing more paid work now than they were in 2019. So the burden has effectively doubled. The drudgery, as the author calls it, hasn't gone away. They've just added a formal job on top of it all.
They're working a double shift every single day.
A double shift with no end. The solution proposed here is so interesting because it doesn't talk about welfare in the traditional sense. It treats infrastructure as a time-saving device. They use this great phrase, gender-complete housing.
I love that term. What does it mean?
Well, under government schemes like PMA, we tend to count a house as just 4 walls and a roof. But this article argues a house isn't complete for a woman unless it has water connectivity from Jal Jeevan and clean cooking fuel from Ujjwala inside the house.
Because if the tap is inside the kitchen, you don't spend an hour walking to the village pumping back.
Precisely. You essentially buy that woman an hour of her life back every single day. That is an hour she can use for paid work, for education, to rest, or to make sure her kids get to that new consolidated school we were just talking about.
It reframes the entire debate.
It does. The expert take is that we need to stop looking at these schemes as just spending in women's name and start seeing them as powerful tools for economic liberation. You are literally unlocking millions of hours of female productivity that are currently being wasted on drudgery.
It completely changes the way you look at a simple water faucet, that's for sure. Now, shifting gears to the science section, we see a story about what happens when women do manage to break through those barriers of time and access. There's an exhibition at the Science Gallery, Bengaluru, called Equations and Empowerment.
This is a really beautiful counter-narrative to the problems we've been discussing. It features these striking portraits of women mathematicians from all over the world. They're standing in front of blackboards just covered in complex equations. It's visual proof of presence. It says, "We are here."
But the data that accompanies the article shows a huge paradox in India. We actually set a world record back in 2024. 40% of STEM enrollment in higher education is female. That's higher than the US, higher than most of Europe.
It's a phenomenal statistic on the surface. We should be proud of it. But then you look one level deeper at the faculty numbers. Who is teaching these subjects? Only 16.7% of STEM faculty in India are women.
So they study it, they master it, and then they just disappear from the profession. The leaky pipeline is still very much a problem. The glass ceiling is still concrete.
It absolutely is. And that's why the personal stories in this exhibition, which the article highlights, are so vital. They humanize the struggle and the triumph. You have Irina Kmit, who came from Ukraine to Berlin. She talks about math as a language without borders. For her, escaping into equations was a form of freedom.
And the story of Neela Nataraj from IIT Bombay, her story felt very grounded, very relatable, because she admitted she was terrified of math as a child. She came from a conservative family where the expected path was marriage, not a PhD in applied mathematics.
And yet, now she's an institute chair professor at one of the top institutions in the country. Or look at the quote from Cornelia Mitchell-Malanda from Congo. She describes the feeling of a mathematical discovery as an addiction. She compares it to a child tasting chocolate for the very first time.
I love that comparison. We usually think of math that's so dry and rigid, but she sees it as this indulgent, joyful experience.
It completely reframes the subject. And the article's main takeaway is that this is why representation matters. Young girls need to see these women, hear these stories. You can't be what you can't see. If math is always presented as a male domain, that 40% enrollment number will never, ever translate into leadership.
From the laws of mathematics, let's pivot now to the laws of the land. The text and context section brings us back to a recurring constitutional friction point, the governor's dress. This is becoming a yearly drama in several states, particularly Tamil Nadu and Kerala.
It really is. It's becoming a standard and frankly ugly feature of Indian federalism, or maybe the breakdown of it. You have governors in opposition-ruled states literally skipping entire paragraphs of their speech editing it on the fly, or in some cases, just walking out altogether.
Okay, let's clarify the rules here for everyone, because my understanding is that the governor is supposed to be the voice of the elected government in that moment, not a personal critic or an editor.
That is exactly right. Article 176 of the Constitution mandates this address. It's not optional. And it's not the governor's personal blog post for the year. It's meant to be the elected government's policy roadmap. The governor is the constitutional head, and in this function, they are a mouthpiece.
So when they edit the speech on the fly, when they skip a part they don't personally agree with, they are essentially censoring the elected government in front of the legislature.
They are. And the Supreme Court has been crystal clear on this over the decades. You have landmark cases like Shemshir Singh way back in 1974, and more recently Nebam-Rebia in 2016. The ruling is consistent. The governor must act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. They cannot substitute their personal political views for the official policy of the state.
So skipping the text is a clear constitutional violation.
It's a violation of the principle, and it creates a friction point that undermines the dignity of the House. The article points to the long-standing recommendations of the Sarkaria and Punchy commissions as the only real way out of this mess.
And their advice was?
It was simple, really. Consult the chief minister before you appoint a governor to their state. If the two have a basic working relationship from day one, you're far less likely to have these kinds of public, politicized spectacles.
Sticking with legal definitions that cause chaos, Article 7 in the same section tackles a phrase we hear all the time in court reporting: coercive measures. The court orders no coercive measures to be taken.
And it sounds incredibly vague, doesn't it? That vagueness causes huge problems for police investigators. No coercive measures mean don't arrest the person, or does it go further? Does it mean don't even ask them a question or don't freeze their bank account?
And the courts have recently had to step in and define this more clearly.
Yes, thankfully. The article cites a crucial Supreme Court ruling, State of UP v. Mohd Arshad Khan, from December 2025. The court basically said that completely stopping an investigation should be the rare exception, not the norm. And then the Delhi High Court added a very practical working definition. They clarified that coercive measures, in this context, refers specifically to personal liberty, meaning arrest. It protects a person from being thrown in jail while an investigation is ongoing.
So, to be clear, it does not mean the police can't freeze your bank account if they suspect financial crime.
Exactly. It doesn't mean they can't interrogate you, seize documents, or take other investigative steps. It just means you get to stay out of jail while that process happens.
That seems like a really crucial distinction for law enforcement to be able to function.
It is. The courts are trying to thread a very fine needle here. On one hand, protecting individual citizens from harassment and wrongful arrest, but on the other, ensuring the police can actually do their job and investigate crimes. The upshot is that if a high court wants to stop an investigation entirely, they now have to be very specific and give concrete reasons. They can't just hide behind a generic, vague, no coercion label anymore.
Now, speaking of libraries and laws, we have a story that sits in the grayest of all legal zones. Article 8 is about something called Anna's Archive. This is the shadow library that has been making massive waves.
Oh, this is a fascinating story. It's a real clash between the ideals of open access and the realities of copyright law. Anna's Archive claims its mission is to back up all knowledge and culture of humanity, a very grand mission.
And to that end, they recently did something pretty audacious.
Extremely audacious. They scraped 86 million music files directly from Spotify. That's 300 terabytes of data. And on top of that, they scraped millions of library records from WorldCat, which is a global catalog.
They present themselves as digital librarians of the apocalypse. We are saving knowledge for the future, preserving culture. And I have to admit, when I read the comments from users in the Global South that the article quotes, there's a very compelling argument there.
It's the core accessibility argument, and it's a powerful one. You have people on Reddit saying things like, knowledge that I got from books from these sites has made people retain jobs. In many developing nations, the cost of academic journals or technical textbooks is just completely prohibitive. For them, these shadow libraries are a genuine lifeline for education and self-improvement.
And it's a massive but. This isn't just a charitable nonprofit operation, is it?
No. And that is where the whole Robin Hood image completely falls apart. The article reveals that Anna's Archive is now selling enterprise-level access to their data trove to AI companies.
Wait, selling the stolen data?
Yes, for tens of thousands of dollars a pop. They are providing the raw training data for the next generation of large language models. So on one hand, they claim this noble mission of fighting for the poor student who can't afford a textbook. But on the other hand, they're directly profiting from the work of artists, authors, and publishers.
And feeding it into the maw of big tech AI, which is a whole other ethical minefield.
Exactly. It massively complicates their moral high ground. It's one thing to argue for sharing a book. It's another thing entirely to sell an author's entire life's work to train a machine that might one day make that author's job obsolete.
It's a huge conflict. And legally, what's happening?
Well, the main site is down or blocked in many places, but the article notes that the downloads are still massive, an average of 883,000 per day. It's a classic game of digital whack-a-mole. You can block one domain, but the demand is so huge that another one just pops up.
Let's zoom out again to the foreign section. We started this deep dive with Trump in Venezuela, and we're circling back to Trump, this time in Europe. Article 9 is titled, Cracks in the Transatlantic Far-Right Alliance.
This is a classic case of be careful what you wish for. For years, the European far right, the nationalists in France, Italy, and elsewhere have cheered for Donald Trump. They loved his rhetoric on immigration, on globalism. He was their guy.
But now his aggressive America First foreign policy is crashing headfirst into their one non-negotiable core value, national sovereignty.
And specifically, it's his renewed ambition to take control of Greenland.
Which is, of course, Danish territory, part of Europe.
Exactly. When Trump starts openly talking about buying or controlling a piece of European land, the Make Europe Great Again crowd suddenly realizes that their own sovereignty is on the menu. They thought the alliance was about keeping others out. They didn't realize it might mean letting America in.
And the reactions have been sharp. Jordan Bardella in France called it commercial blackmail and subjugation. Giorgia Meloni in Italy, usually a Trump ally, called it a mistake.
They have to say that. They can't stand on a stage and call themselves nationalists and then applaud a foreign power carving up parts of Europe for commercial gain. The ideological alignment, which was always a bit shaky and mostly based on being anti-immigration, is fracturing under the pressure of Trump's raw imperialism.
But the article points out there is one notable holdout, Viktor Orban in Hungary.
Orban is always the outlier, isn't he? He's staying loyal. He's trying to frame it as just an in-house NATO issue, nothing to worry about. But the expert analysis in the piece suggests this is pure pragmatism on his part.
How so?
He sees the Trump-Venezuela oil deal that we discussed right at the top of the show. He understands that the global energy market is being rigged in real time by Trump, and he wants to make sure Hungary is on the side that gets access to the cheap oil.
So he's willing to trade a little bit of European solidarity for a discount at the gas pump.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
For him, the economic benefit outweighs the ideological contradiction.
We move now to our final section, the spotlight section, where we leave the high tables of diplomacy and look at the real human cost of these borders and these policies. Article 10, Echoes of Exile, takes us to a place called Nepalgarh in Bihar.
This is a deeply, deeply moving piece of journalism. It contrasts two timelines, 1965 and today, January 2026. Nepalgarh, which is officially in Kishanganj, is a settlement of Bengali Hindu refugees who fled what was then East Pakistan decades ago during the war.
And they've built good lives there, right? The article introduces us to Sukandulal Saha. He's 73, a retired banker. His sons are successful, one at SBI, one at Microsoft. He has concrete lanes, street lights. He made it. He found safety and prosperity in India.
He is the success story. He escaped the trauma. But the absolute tragedy is that while he sits in his safe, developed town, his own history is repeating itself just across the border. Following the recent monsoon revolution in Bangladesh and the ousting of Sheikh Hasina, there's a new wave of sectarian violence.
And he still has family over there.
30 relatives in the Feni district. And the communication lines are down. He can't reach them. That silence the article conveys is just a form of torment. You have another woman, 85-year-old Pachapoti Sudradhar, just sitting there with her prayer beads, not having heard from her kin in 2 weeks.
It's that contrast that is just so heartbreaking. They are sitting in physical safety, enjoying the fruits of development in India, but emotionally, their hearts are stuck in the exact same trauma they escaped 50 years ago.
It really highlights how fragile and arbitrary these borders can be. On this side, you have a paved road and the sun at Microsoft. A few hundred kilometers away on that side, there's just chaos and fear.
And yet, as our final tragic story shows, safety on this side of the border isn't always guaranteed either. Article 11, Tragedy in Sector 150, exposes a different kind of danger, not from war or revolution, but from pure civic apathy.
This is the story of Yuvraj Mehta. And it's just horrific. It happened on January 16th in Greater Noida, one of the big satellite cities of Delhi.
He was driving home in a dense fog.
A dense fog, late at night. The road he was on came to a sharp, unannounced 90-degree turn. There were no streetlights, no warning signage, no barriers. He drove straight off the road and plunged into a deep, water-filled pit left by a construction project.
But the crash itself didn't kill him.
No. And this is the part of the story that is just so haunting and infuriating. He survived the fall. He managed to climb onto the roof of his sinking car, standing in the freezing cold water. He called his father for help. He was flashing his phone's torch, screaming.
And the official response? The emergency services.
The police and the fire brigade arrived at the scene, but according to witnesses quoted in the article, they refused to enter the water. They allegedly said it was too cold and the fog was too thick. They just stood on the edge and watched.
They watched while he drowned.
They stood and watched while he drowned. The only person who tried to help was a food delivery agent named Maninder Singh. He saw what was happening, tied a rope around himself, and went into the water. But he couldn't find Yuvraj in time in the dark.
That is a complete and total collapse of civic duty, a failure at every single level.
It is. And it wasn't a freak accident. The article makes it clear this was a predictable tragedy. The National Green Tribunal had already flagged this construction site as a hazard. Local residents had complained repeatedly to the Noida Authority about the lack of lights and barriers. It was a known death trap.
And now, of course, after the death, after the outrage, there's action. Arrests of the builders, the CEO of the Noida Authority has been removed.
But it's too late for Yuvraj Mehta. The banners that residents have put up in the neighborhood say it all. No development, no vote. It highlights the fatal cost of this unaccountable, breakneck urban planning we see all over the NCR. We build shiny new sectors, but we forget to build the basic systems of safety and accountability that are supposed to keep people alive in them.
It's a sobering end. From the engineered chaos of the Donroe Doctrine in Venezuela to the neglected, fatal pits of Noida, the lesson today really seems to be that systems, whether they're global or local, only work if you hold them accountable.
Absolutely. Whether it's international treaties or local municipal building codes, constant vigilance seems to be the only real safety net we have left.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.